People are always like, oh, another password puzzle? God damn. That tends to be the type of puzzle I make. Let's go a keypad puzzle, keypad, password puzzles, and the occasional distraction puzzle, maybe.
Hi there, and welcome back to the Point and Click Devlog, an ongoing series in which a long press may or may not reveal all the interactable objects in your vicinity. I'm deviating from the norm slightly this time around by talking about something other than myself and my game. In an effort to turn that lens outwards, I recently sat down for a Zoom call with Dave Gilbert, the other famous Gilbert in the point and click industry, and the man behind what is arguably the genre's most influential studio this side of the millennium, Wadjet Eye Games. Now, if you've not heard of Wadjet Eye, then you probably haven't played a point and click game very recently. Dave and his partners have, between them, developed or published most of the biggest adventure games of the past decade, including the Blackwell series, Gemini Rue, Techno Babylon, Shardlight, and Unavowed. All of which I figure makes Dave the man in the know when it comes to proffering advice on the subject of developing a point and click game yourself. And Dave's daughter Evie, meanwhile, joined the call for some light comedic relief. Okay, obvious stuff up front. How did Dave get started?
I mean, I live in New York. It was September. It was 2001. You know what happened. And I was, I had been laid off from a horrible corporate job several months previously. So I didn't have a job and I was just stuck in my little one-room studio apartment, kind of not wanting to go out or do anything. So I discovered Adventure Games Studio. And, or actually more specifically, I discovered Reality on the Norm, which was the series of adventure games, which was kind of, how do you describe this thing? Basically, it's like a communal project where anyone could create a game in this world with the caveat that you had to share the assets when you were done. So then anyone could take your assets, make their own game with them, add their assets, and then that would get added to the pile. So there were about 5 games at the time, and I played them, and I'm like, oh, I could probably make one of these. Let's take a look. And so I downloaded the AGS engine, I went through the documentation, and I made this little game set in Reality on the Norm in like a weekend. It was called The Repossessor, and it was a game that was the main character was the Grim Reaper. So you can imagine, like, I had a couple of dark thoughts to purge from my brain. Anyway, I released it. People seemed to like it, and I just kept making them. And then about 2006 or so, I was unemployed again. But this time I had money saved up, and I just thought, you know what? I can't envision doing anything else. I had made about 4 or 5 freeware games by that point. I couldn't envision doing anything else, and I decided, well, it's now or never. So I went for it, and almost 15 years later, I am still doing it. So here I am.
So why point and click games? Well, Dave explains that firstly, the genre was really close to his heart.
I mean, back in the day, you know, from like back when I was growing up playing these games, I loved like Loom and Gabriel Knight and Monkey Island and all the King's Quests and stuff. As I grew up playing those, so I kind of got like the tropes and language that I'm familiar with came from all of those.
But also that he saw point and click adventure games as the most obvious kind of game for a budding storyteller to make.
I don't like to think that it's like this obscure niche-y, you know, obscure genre that only like a select few, you know, folks in an echo chamber like. I mean, if that was the case, I wouldn't be have like earned my living from it for like almost 15 years now. I basically support my family on this stuff. So
sure.
There's a definite love of them as it's basically anyone who likes good stories, or they like anyone who likes good stories or good interactive stories can like a point and click adventure game.
If you were to write a brief history of Wadjet Eye Games, you'd probably draw a straight line from there to now and say that the studio has been a riotous success. But while Dave's ability to go from making freeware games to helming the modern scene's most famous development house is hugely impressive, I'm keen to know what people like you, that's the person watching this video, can learn from his processes. In other words, how does Dave actually make a game?
I typically have like a germ of an idea, and then I just sort of workshop it in my notebook or in I use Google Docs now, so I can switch from my computer to my iPad to wherever I can go wherever. But like I don't know, they just wherever ideas come from. I'm just glad they do. Usually it's like I am inspired by something. I'm like struck with an idea, and I just sort of let it sit in my head, and eventually something just happens.
Okay, so how do you workshop an idea? In an early episode here, I talked about writing my design document and how I found that to be a really helpful step. So I was keen to know if Dave does that too, and to what level. Like, is he writing a rough outline or whole lines of dialogue up front?
I have a design document that I kind of give up halfway through because everything changes. I usually will write the dialogue before I create the scene. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I will like block out the scene first. Like I will. I know how the scene and the puzzles will play out, but I want to make sure it's fun. So I program all that in, kind of using placeholder art just to make sure I got the flow right. And then I add the dialogue in later. Sometimes if I'm just stuck, I will write the dialogue first, and then stuff will just naturally kind of evolve from there. So it's like I try one way. If it doesn't work, I try another way. I mean, I usually kind of have a vague destination in mind, but no real roadmap on how to get there. And then eventually I just do. And every time I get frustrated, I just remember like, there was that one game, like I didn't even know who the villain was going to be until I was like halfway through it, and everyone loved that game. So maybe it'll work out this time. I just sort of like, just sort of have faith that it will work out.
Crucially, as I think I've learned, this process should come pretty naturally to you. If it doesn't, maybe you're not working on the right thing. And that's something Dave recently experienced with his latest project.
After about 3 months of just forcing it, and just everything was just so like inadequate. Everything just felt very flat. I just took a day out of frustration and said, you know what? I'm going to take that Old Skies design and see what I can do with it. I'm just going to take a day. And then I designed like a third of the game in a few hours. And I'm like, you know what? This seems to be where the muse is taking me. So I'm just gonna do this instead. And I've been doing that for the last like 8 or 9 months.
So then, what are Dave's game design principles? What kind of rules does he hold himself to?
I guess if I have any principle, it's that I always try to put myself in the shoes of the player, because it's not enough to understand my character's motives, but I need to understand the player's motives. Like, I try to think, okay, I know why my character's doing this, but why do I care? Why do I care about going on this quest, solving these puzzles? Like, where's my emotional investment at the moment? And I try to think of like how the audience will react to some revelation or some puzzle or something happening. And often like that usually is the best. Approach it like a fan. I got to approach it like a fan of these games. And it's like, as a fan, am I excited by this? I'm like, no, I'm not. It's clever, but I'm not. I don't think I'd be excited by this as a fan. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to change it. And I always think the same way.
As Dave explains though, putting yourself in the player's shoes like that can mean things drag on a bit at times.
It tends to make me tear my hair out a lot, and makes me second guess myself for weeks or months before I actually make a thing, which is why it takes me so much longer to make stuff. I don't know if that's worth it or not, but thus far people seem to like my work, even though it takes longer than I'd like for me to get it out there.
Okay, that's the broad stroke stuff nailed, but what about the nitty gritty? One of the key elements in a point and click adventure game are the puzzles, right? Well, according to Dave, not really.
I suck at puzzles. The number one complaint about all the games that I've personally written is that they're easy. They're not a lot of puzzles, and I agree. Because I suck at them. I don't like them. I often if I'm really into a game, and a puzzle is thrown at me, and it's like just an obstacle in my way, and I just want to see what happens next. Even though I'm aware this is an interactive thing, it's not a book, it's not a movie. I'm still frustrated. And like back in the day, I remember like being in the 5th grade playing No, I was like in the 7th grade playing King's Quest 3. And I spent weeks trying to defeat that stupid wizard. And when I finally did it, I'm like, I was happy to do it. It was exciting. Now I'd last 5 minutes before I go onto Google and try to find out the answer. And it's like, modern developers get that. Like, we know that you're only stuck if you want to be. And my philosophy has always been, if you have to leave my game to enjoy it, then I have failed as a designer. I want you to stay in my game. And so a lot of modern developers, they get that, and they focus more on the other elements of what makes these games fun. They focus on things like immersion and the interactivity, the responsiveness, that kind of stuff. So I tend to try to focus on that, making the moment-to-moment stuff fun, rather than focusing on puzzles, because like I said, I suck at making them. People always say, oh, another password puzzle? God damn. That tends to be the type of puzzle I make. Let's go a keypad puzzle, password puzzles, and the occasional distraction puzzle, maybe. I'm not good at puzzles, and half the time I do an elaborate puzzle. Like there's a puzzle sequence in the game I'm making now. I spent a week putting it together. It was really complicated. And Ben, my artist, played it, and he's like, this is really bad. This is just boring. I'm like, yeah, I'm just getting rid of the whole thing, and it hurts to do it, but it's much more fun now. It's much more fun because you get to the meat of the experience faster.
And this is an interesting point, and it's one that I personally fully agree with. When I play a point-and-click game, I'm there for the story and the atmosphere. If the game is a vehicle for those, then the puzzles are the gear changes. They're necessary, but not necessarily integral. There's a fine line between making a puzzle satisfying and either too easy or too hard, but as Dave says, it's probably better to err on the easy side. In other words, if you want a tough puzzle, play a Sudoku.
I heard this comment of like, oh, Unavowed or Blackwell is nowhere near as long as like, Monkey Island was, but it's more like you remember it being longer because you spend more time on the puzzles. If you play I was really amazed how short Space Quest 3 was. I finished it in like 40 minutes. It takes once you know everything, it takes no time to play through it. But I remember, it taking a long time because I was stuck on the puzzles. So, I mean, once you know the solution to everything, it does not take all that long. And even if you're trying to pad your game out with puzzles now, it doesn't work because you just go to Google and you find out the answer.
So maybe then modern point-and-click games don't have to be quite as tough as classics from the 90s. But do they need to evolve in other ways? As Dave revealed in his 2019 Adventure X talk, Unavowed has become one of Wadjet Eye's most successful titles. And you might argue that part of its success is the way it introduces brand new elements to the genre, including an RPG-like party system that opens up tons of different paths. But here's the thing, I'm making a game very much in the mould of the old LucasArts classics. It won't push the genre forward at all, it's just going to exist within that existing niche. So I wanted to ask Dave if he thought that was a mistake. And thankfully, he reckons there's plenty of space for less ambitious titles, so long as they're still done well.
That's another thing. I mentioned that in my talk, that pressure to like shake up the world with your work it's kind of, it can be paralyzing. And it's like, you want to, like, I once worked with a developer, the project never got off the ground, but he had this whole crazy idea for how you do dialogue. Like you click on various things in the room, and I don't know, it was just a very, very complicated way of doing a standard dialogue tree. And I'm just like, why don't you just do a dialogue tree? It's easier. You get, it's like, why don't you just do that? And it's like, oh, like, I guess I could. It's just kind of boring though, isn't it? I'm like, it works. Just do it. It's like saying, do you have to revolutionize books? Do you always have to revolutionize movies or television with everything you create? No, you don't. And you could just sort of focus on telling a good story and tell it well. Don't phone it in, but it doesn't have to revolutionize the world.
All of which leaves only one question, and it's the one that most experts dread. How would you sum up your advice for anyone looking to replicate your success?
I mean, the thing is, I hate this question because all my advice is like 15 years out of date. What I did back then was I started very, very, very small. I made kind of accidentally. I had very little resources to work with, and very little time in which to make a game, or at least very little time before I went broke. So I deliberately had to keep my games very short and very contained. And so as a result, I was able to kind of get feedback faster and iterate off of that and kind of grow very organically. And I don't know how I tell someone to do that on purpose. But yeah, I mean, I know it's very, the market's so different now, that any advice I give, like I said, will be completely irrelevant. But I will say, like, don't bet the farm on one project for your first go round. Like, that is the easiest way to drive yourself nuts. I will say, start small, start careful, and make sure you really love it. Like, I wouldn't have gotten to where I was if I didn't like what I do. There are easier ways to earn a living, for sure. But I can think of few that are satisfying. So I keep doing it. And I guess good luck.
Start small, start careful. Don't bet the farm on one project. I didn't really have the heart to tell Dave that I've basically done the opposite of his advice here. Instead, I asked him before he had to go to tell us a little bit about Old Skies, the new game he's working on with artist and longtime Wadjet Eye collaborator Ben Chandler.
The game is a time travel story where basically time ends. You encounter these rogue time travelers who accidentally just destroy time, and you have to go basically, like, after like a certain date, like nothing exists anymore.
Right,
just everything ends. There's like just void. And so you have to, you're a time traveler who's like going to various eras to try to find out what exactly happened, and you're trying to stop it. And the core of it centers around this generations of this one family called the Inmans. And so you kind of follow this family through about 5 generations and trying to like untangle the conspiracy that surrounds them and try to fix what happened. So that's the gist of it.
It looks and sounds really awesome, right? I just hope I don't end up competing with Old Skies in the charts. Anyway, that was just about it from Dave, so that's it from me for another episode too. So look, thanks for watching. I hope you gleaned plenty of useful advice from Dave's insights, just as I did. I'll stick links to his Adventure X talk and some of Wadjet Eye's game portfolio in the info below, next to that lovely big button that says subscribe. Don't forget you can join us in the community Discord server if you're making your own game and fancy talking to like-minded people. And you can also follow the Devlog on Twitter if you like to follow Twitter accounts that post about once a month. If not, no worries, I will catch you in the next one.